Hello, my name's Ken. I've been involved in consulting and education in operations and supply chain for probably close to the last 25 years. I'm going to talk to you today about the importance of inventory management in your supply chains. I think if you look at supply chains from the point where we take minerals out of the ground all the way through to the point where we buy products out of the supermarket, you'll appreciate that there's a huge number of warehouses all along the supply chain. And we need to make sure that these warehouses are performing in the best way that they can. Many of us have problems with excessive costs in our supply chain, stockouts. We end up with too much of the wrong material and not enough of the right material. And so we need to apply some of the principles that have been learned over the years around the world to try and improve the way that materials flow down the supply chain. And flow is absolutely key, because all benefits that we derive from the supply chain are as a result of flow of materials down the supply chain and flow of information going up the supply chain. And the faster we can get this flow going, the bigger the benefits. So time is one of the most important aspects of supply chain management. How can we reduce time? How can we reduce the lead time it takes for us to replenish our stock? How can we reduce the inventory levels that we have in our system? And how can we increase the customer service that we give to our customers? So flow is incredibly important. Time is incredibly important. So one of the first things we need to look at in our warehouses is, are the warehouses adopting best practices that are regarded as best practice around the world? And in many cases, I think in our warehouses, we tend to employ people that maybe don't have the right levels of education that they should have. They're looking after huge amounts of money, and we need to make sure that they're well educated and well trained and understand the best practices in the warehouse. Housekeeping is absolutely important. I always say that a messy store is never going to be accurate. The key measure in your warehouse always has to be inventory accuracy. And that is a problem I find in many warehouses around the world. People have problems keeping their inventory accurate in their systems. And one of the main reasons for that is that they're doing monthly stock takes. Now, a monthly or quarterly or annual stock take is probably only about 85 or 90% accurate. And this is nowhere near accurate enough for us to be able to use our planning systems effectively. And so we need to improve the accuracy in our warehouses. And the only way we've found to do that over the years internationally is to implement proper cycle counting processes. Now, the objective of a good cycle counting process is not to get your stock accurate, which most people think that is the objective. The objective of a good cycle counting process is to find out why your stock becomes inaccurate and then fix the problems. And then as a byproduct of your cycle counting process, your stock becomes more and more and more and more accurate. And there are many warehouses around the world that have achieved accuracy levels of well above 99%. And if we can get to that sort of level, it helps us out considerably when we want to do any form of inventory management. So once we've got the inventory accurate in our warehouse, we can then start considering the inventory control techniques that we need to put in place to make sure that we have the right stock at the right time in the right place in the supply chain. And there are 4 questions that we need to ask of every item in our database. And those 4 questions are, what is the importance of the item that I'm looking after? How am I going to control it? When I replenish it, how much do I order? And lastly, when do I place the order? So let's see how we answer those 4 questions in our warehouse. The first thing we need to do is some form of ABC analysis. In a warehouse, not all items are equal. Some items are more important than other items. And by doing an ABC analysis, we can see those items that are more important than others. To do an ABC analysis, you need to look at the usage of the item that's going through your warehouse, and you need to look at its value. And typically what we do is multiply those two figures together and come up with a dollar usage value. We can then sort from the highest to the lowest, and then we can categorize the list. So we end up with a few A items, a medium number of B items, and probably 50% of the items in your warehouse will turn out to be C items. And then we have two basic rules. Use your time and control to manage your A items. We all have limited time in the supply chain. Let's apply that time to the more important things. For your C items, just make sure you've got plenty and you don't run out. They're probably only worth about 5% of usage value in your warehouse. The second question is, well, how am I going to control these items? And based on the ABC analysis, I'm going to put different levels of control in place. I'm going to put very high levels of control in place on my A items. And my C items, as long as I've got plenty and I don't run out, that's fine. So we will probably use computer systems to manage the A items and the B items, but maybe we'll use other visual review systems, two-bin systems possibly, to manage the C items. So we've answered the first two questions, and basically ABC analysis has helped us answer those two questions. The importance of the item and how am I going to control it. The third question is, when I replenish this item, how much am I going to order at a time? Am I going to order enough for a day, a week, a month, maybe a year? We need to determine what is the most economical order quantity for this item. And to start this process off, we might use economical order quantity formula, which is available to us. If we do that, we need to understand another couple of pieces of information about your warehouse and about your business. And the first one is, how much does it cost you to keep materials in your supply chain? And that's a very important figure, I think, that management needs to understand. And the second figure is, how much does it cost me to place a purchase order if it's a procured item, or if it's a manufactured item, how much does it cost me to place a manufacturing order on my factory? With those two pieces of information, I can start working out what an economical order quantity might be. However, there will probably be some other logistical issues that I need to take into account, particularly if I'm shipping this product from overseas. I may have to fill a container, or if I'm bringing it from another part of the country, I may need to fill a truck to bring up to my factory. The fourth question we have to answer is, when we need to replenish, when are we going to replenish this stock? When do I place the order? That's the fourth question. Now here we have to look at the different types of items in your database. There are two types of items: independent demand items and dependent demand items. Independent demand items are those items that you sell to your customer. We call them independent because the demand for the item is independent of anything we have control over. It is the customer who decides to buy. And so independent demand items in my database, I have to forecast. And because I'm never accurate in my forecasts, I generally have to carry some safety stock as well. When it comes to dependent demand items, we call them dependent because the items I use to build my products, the raw materials and packaging requirements, are dependent on how many products I'm going to build. And I have control over that in my factory. So if I decide to build 100 products, it's just a matter of multiplying down through my bills of materials, and I can calculate how many raw materials, components, and packaging items I need. So we calculate that using materials requirements planning. Let's have a look at the replenishment systems for independent demand items, and typically there are two. There's the reorder point system. So if I know the average usage of my item and I know the lead time it takes me to get that item, I can calculate a reorder point in which I also include my safety stock levels as well. So the rule is, when the level of inventory reaches that reorder point, then I reorder the economical order quantity. There is another system we can use. We use a periodic review system. So periodically we go and review the quantity that we have in stock, and we then reorder up to what we call the target level. So once a month we may go down and have a look at what's left decide what to order, and place the order. So reorder point systems and periodic review systems are what we will use for independent demand items. Dependent demand items, as I mentioned before, we will use our materials requirements planning systems. And we will explode down through the bills of materials and determine, based on how many we're going to manufacture in the factory, what we need to buy, how many and when we need them, and what we need to manufacture, how many and when we need to start manufacturing them. Once we have these basics in place, we can then start looking at how can we improve inventory management in our supply chain. And there are some other tools that we can look at, and one of them is Lean. Lean starts looking at mapping your processes, it starts looking for those wasteful processes, it starts looking for waste in the supply chain. And our objective is we want to take waste out of the supply chain. We want to lean down the inventories as far as possible and keep them flowing as quickly as possible. So there's some techniques that we can apply there to make some improvements in our supply chain. Another technique we can look at is the theory of constraints. And the theory of constraints is all about throughput through your manufacturing facility. And we want to increase throughput. And more often than not, we have some form of bottleneck within the system. So we need to identify bottlenecks, we need to buffer the bottlenecks, we need to make sure the bottlenecks, we can increase the throughput through those bottlenecks and ultimately increase the throughput through our supply chains. Another technique which you may have heard of is Six Sigma. Six Sigma is about looking at the variation in our processes. If you look at any process in your business, you will find the time it takes to complete that process varies somewhat. We need to understand that variation, and we need to try and reduce it as far as possible. So, using those tools in our toolbox, we can put some improvements into our supply chain. More recently, a new methodology has come to the fore, which is being tested by a number of large organizations around the world. And it's being called Demand-Driven Materials Requirements Planning, DDMRP. And the success that a number of companies are getting from this technique are absolutely mind-blowing. You know, increasing service levels up to 99%, reducing lead times by 80%, and reducing inventories in the system 30-40%, and just making huge strides forward. And this, we think, is going to be probably the next big thing in materials management in the supply chain. If you need to know any more about what I've spoken about today, talk to Iscs, and I wish you good luck in the future. Thank you.